Hello, welcome to Propolis, the Great Protector. So it's Friday, 4 o'clock, and the usual time for my webinar. So this week it's all about Propolis. So thank you very much for joining me. You should know by now that if the bees die, we've only got 4 more years of life. And this quote is often attributed to Albert Einstein. And the idea is that because we need the bees to pollinate our food, if we lose the bees, then within 4 years we won't have any food left to pollinate. But I feel there's a more deeper meaning to this. I feel that the bees are indicating what's happening on the planet, and when the bees die, they die just before we do. So I think that we will go within the 4 years, but not just because of pollination. So the bees are the key to saving our planet. It's where we all live, and this is my life's work. My passion is sharing the messages that I get from the bees and that I'm learning from the bees that I feel humanity need to know and understand. So we're about to start. I'm just going to wait for a few more people to come. So if you're catching this on replay, thank you very much. If you're here live, again, thank you for joining me. I really appreciate you giving me your time. Time is a very precious commodity, so I'm really grateful that you're joining me today to learn all about Propolis. So you're in the right place if you want to understand what Propolis is and why it's so valuable to the bees and how it can be the key to human health, particularly at this time. So what we'll do is I'm live on Facebook and on YouTube. So if you can add your questions, insights or comments as we go, there's put them in the chat box. If you're on Facebook, you may have to give permission to actually share your name. So just put your name in so I can see who you are. That would be really great. And I'll be answering questions at the end. So I'm just going to go through the presentation first. And tag your friends, share away. The more the merrier. It'd be great to have lots of people here. It's always nice to feel that I'm not just talking to myself. So share the love, share the bee wisdom, and anyone who you think would be interested in Propolis, then tag them. And thank you very much. I see Dawn has already tagged Andrew, so I hope you're both here. So hello, I'm going to start. I'm Paula Carnell, and I'm creating a buzz about health. So here I am. So my work is as a beekeeper and a bee speaker, and I write, and I'm just passionate about bees. They're my life. So here I am with my van, Queenie, which takes me all over the place looking after bees and ferrying around this motley crew. This is my bee team. So here we are all in disguise in our bee suits. So there's me, Randy, Linda, Kerry and Joe. And a better view here without the masks on, so you can see who we are. And this is us all working together at one of our clients. So hello, Maggie. Thank you for joining us. Good to see you here. So there I am with the bee team. We're really lucky. Between us all, we've probably got about 60, maybe even 70 years worth of beekeeping experience. And Joe Bleasdale on the right there, he is author of quite a few books on beekeeping in worry hives and with no fuss and no chemicals. So we are treatment-free beekeepers. We don't use chemicals inside the hive. And I like to call it a form of beekeeping called naturopathic beekeeping, which fits in with my own beliefs and understandings about health, following my own health journey. I'm not going to talk too much about my health journey, but I learned a lot through recovering from Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. And so what I learned about maintaining my own well-being, I've transferred into bees. And what I'm loving is that the science is backing it all up now. So what do I do? What does somebody like me do as a beekeeper for a career? I'm full-time. But I don't have hundreds and hundreds of beehives. I look after individual colonies for clients. And then I have some clients who have more colonies. So one of them is the Newt in Somerset, some of you may have been to, where I've been lucky enough to experiment with different types of beehives, and I'll do bee safaris as well. So you can see me here collecting a hive. A swarm on the left that were up in a tree. They'd escaped from one of the hives that we had. And on the right, I'm inspecting a hive, which is a freedom hive made by Matt Somerville of Be Kind Hives, who I'm delighted to work with several of his hives. And these are great because they hang up in the trees, and it's mimicking the natural way that bees would live. And we learn a lot from having access to a hive, whereas if they're inside the tree, we just have to guess what's going on inside. So I also make skeps and sun hives, and because I've got my own colonies, I also have beeswax polish, and then I produce honey, and I'm also a honey sommelier and honey judge. So there's me concentrating very hard as I'm judging some honey at the London International Honey Show last year, 2019. I was also one of the judges this year, but of course we all had to judge from home. So we were sent all the little samples, and then we had lots of Zoom calls to compare notes. So that's another part of my work. And what I'm really passionate about is the speaking. So I actually did a tea party with Lynn Franks in Wincanton. That was a year ago, and we did a bee tea party out in her garden of her Seed Hub store, and that sold out. That was great fun. And I'm an adventurer. Jacqueline Freeman calls me a bee adventurer. I love traveling, and because when I started beekeeping, I didn't have this great line or heritage of beekeeping in my family. I was the first one, and I was learning from scratch from a mentor. I felt that I needed to build my own understanding of bees, and I've always been on this quest to find where bees are healthy in the world and how different people around the world take care of bees. So this is a picture of me in Oman, and I have been lucky enough to travel to all kinds of amazing places and meet all kinds of incredible beekeepers. And what I love is the synergy that you will pick up a little bit of knowledge or information from a beekeeper in the middle of a mountainous terrain where there's 3 houses and that's it, and that bit of knowledge can carry forward and help somebody on the other side of the world in Canada, or it can help somebody in Bhutan or in South Africa, or even here in the UK. So I really love this that aspect of my life, and my travels have inspired my book. So I've got The Bees in Bhutan and my 2 versions of Artist to Bees. So there's a black and white version, and then there's a color illustrated version. And then in the background, you can see my 40 Flowers book. And that was from my previous career where I was an artist. And for my 40th birthday, I produced this book with 40 of my flower paintings. And then on my 40th year, I fell ill. And so that was when the transition into bees came. So artist to bee speaker was my journey. But today I'm going to talk about propolis. Now, just before you ask, this is what I do not do. So this is the bee bearding, where people cover themselves in bees. So I may be a naturopathic beekeeper, but I do wear a suit, and I may sit with my own bees without a veil, and I may not use gloves with some of my colonies, but I do not walk around covered in bees. So just don't ask. So today I'm going to talk about propolis. So what is propolis? Now, Aristotle was one of the great thinkers of humanity, and he was fascinated with bees. So even at an early time, he was just amazed with bees and how they organize themselves. And he actually had a glass observation hive in his study. And what would irritate him was, perhaps it was to protect themselves from light, or maybe it was just to protect themselves. The bees would coat the inside of this glass dome with this sticky resin, and Aristotle was constantly having to clean it off. But it got him to thinking, and he analysed what this was, and he observed the bees and where they were getting this substance from. And he noticed they were taking it from the resins of trees. And so he called it propolis. And pro in Greek means before, and polis is city. So he's thinking of it as the protector of the city, it's the protector of the colony. And what I really, really love was or a couple of years ago, there was a Learning from the Bees conference, a natural beekeeping conference in Holland. And there was this amazing speaker called Carsten Massey. And he was discussing, along with Gareth John from the Natural Beekeeping Trust, about what is the purpose of propolis. And we tend to think of bees as individuals. We see an individual bee and we think, oh, I'll save this little bee. But in actual fact, the bees are one when they're in a whole colony. So when it's 50,000 bees, that is the one. And so if an individual bee is not an individual and is not sustainable on its own, then what holds this colony together? So as a human being, we're made up of millions of micro organisms, and we've got all kinds of things going on in our body, and we're held in by our skin. So what Gareth John and Kirsten Massey were talking about is perhaps the skin for bees is the propolis. So in the wild, the bees will line their hive with propolis, and so it acts as their skin. So isn't this an amazing thought? So this changes our perspective about why bees have propolis, but also, if it is a skin, what are the properties of propolis? And then how do the bees make the propolis? So they take the resin from trees, we know that, but when it's been analysed, propolis has got elements of wax and pollen, and it's got so many different products in it. It's got 16 amino acids, it contains resins, it's got fatty acids, waxes, essential oils, pollen, and then 5% of other organics and minerals. So as you know from my other talks, I know how important that trace minerals are to the body. And so this is such a complex product. It's such an amazing thing to have. And a hive will make between 10 to 300 grams of propolis per year. So they obviously know it has a purpose. You know, they are actually creating this propolis. So here we have a bee that's visiting a flower, collecting pollen, and you can just see the shiny globule there, and that will be propolis. So that'll be the resin from a tree, which it will take back to the hive. And then when it's in the hive, it will actually mold it into this sticky, pliable glue, filling in any gaps. So the picture on the right you can see is a hessian cloth, which we use on the top of some of our hives. And the bees will fill in some of the gaps in between where the frames. So we'll have the frames in the hive, and on top we'll have this hessian sheet, and the bees will fill in the gaps to stop any drafts. And they'll actually use this propolis. So you can see the propolis here is a very sort of sticky, orangey brown substance. And beekeepers have often cursed propolis because it is sticky. It will stick all the frames together. It will stick the hive together. It makes a really uncomfortable crack when you open up a hive that has been stuck together with propolis. And so over years, beekeepers have bred bees to not make much propolis, which is a real concern, because if propolis is as important as we now know for bees, then no wonder bees have been getting sick if we've been preventing them from creating their own skin, which protects their bodies. So why do they need the propolis? So I've talked about it being their skin, but they actually protect the hive. The propolis lines the entrances. So this is a hive down in South Africa, and this is Apis capensis, which was said to not make propolis. But I've seen these hives where the bees are kept in a semi-wild state, so they're not over manipulated, they're not treated with any chemicals, and you'll see that they've blocked up the whole entrance of the hive with propolis with tiny little holes. Now this is a winter colony, this is during the winter months, so the bees aren't coming and going quite as often, so they don't need a wide entrance. And the good thing about propolis is it is pliable, so they can widen and narrow an entrance as they go. It's up to them. They don't, you know, it's not like building a brick wall or having a piece of wood in there. The bees have control over how wide or narrow the entrances are. So the propolis properties, it's antibiotic. So, you know, it kills the bacteria. Now, inside a hive, it's kept at this amazing temperature of, like our body temperature, 35 to 37 degrees. So it's the perfect environment you would imagine for bacteria to thrive, and yet it doesn't. So if you have the antibiotic properties of propolis, it's actually protecting the bees in that way. It's anti-inflammatory. And these are all things that have been proven by science. And the propolis has been used by humans for thousands of years, right back to the Egyptians, because of these properties. Antifungal, so it will actually prohibit the growth of funguses. It's antioxidant. So we all know how wonderful antioxidants are for maintaining our health, and antiviral. Now, how crucial is that at this time? So you have this propolis that's got all these resins and fatty acids, waxes, essential oils, and it's got all these medicinal properties as well. So it's a really incredible product. So, no wonder the bees are actually wanting it. So here's a colony that I look after, and you can see inside the hive, and this is a golden hive, another hive made by Matt Somerville, which is a deep box, and it has 4 entrance holes. And what we observed quite soon was, after moving a colony from a bait hive into one of these hives, within a week, they had done these sort of flaps, these closures over some of the entrance holes. Now, when you look inside, so on the left, you can see what the entrance would look like from the outside, and how the bees have narrowed the entrance just so that they could allow one bee out, one bee in. So it's just a narrow road, a narrow pathway. And then on the inside, you can see this massive bulbous lump of propolis, which they can ply. They can shut the doors, they can open them. So at this time of year, wasps are starting to get a little bit crazy and trying to get into beehives. And if bees can actually produce their own propolis, they can close the hatches, they can protect themselves from intruders. So it really is invaluable. And it's so tragic to think that bees have been bred for years to not be able to produce propolis. And as I'm rearing more and more colonies from the natural stock that I've got in this area, I'm finding the older colonies are producing more and more propolis. So is that because they're breeding and they're now more able to do it, and they're now aware that they can do it? Is it because they're sicker and they now need to produce more propolis? So we'll never really know, but we know that propolis is good. So when I see this going on in a hive, I'm really excited, because I know that the bees are doing what they need to do to look after themselves. And here you can see the propolis going along, sticking on the super, or a brood box. So they've just lined up any nooks and crannies, anywhere where the frames will sit, or anywhere there's a gap, they'll actually fill it in with propolis. So actually, for a beekeeper, if you can look at it as a harvestable crop, which has quite a bit of value, then it isn't so annoying when you're trying to open up a hive or trying to get to things. But it is very difficult to clean off. And when you have it on your tools and on your bee suit, it stains yellow, and you really do have to work hard to get it off. So this is another reason why bees have got the propolis in there, to protect themselves from bacteria. So in Minnesota, they have been doing research on propolis with bees for many, many years. Marla Spivak has done TED Talks, and she's written lots of papers about the advantages of propolis in hives. And there was this very famous story which has been repeated by many beekeepers, and there's been many beekeepers who've also experienced the same thing, where a mouse will crawl into a hive in the winter to keep warm, because it's this lovely warm environment and the bees are in a cluster at the top of the hive. So mice that can squash themselves down and get into the smallest holes, Joe, our beekeeper, tells us they can get into the size of a pencil hole. So a mouse will squish himself in, get into the hive, make a bit of a nest. They'll chew away some of the wax, which to that point isn't too bad. But when they start to defecate, the bees don't like this. They do not like anything unclean in their hive. They want to keep it nice and have the smell nice. And anyone who's lifted the lid of a hive, you know how wonderful it smells. And so what they do is they kill the mice, and it takes about 5 stings to kill a mouse, and then they completely coat it in propolis, because they can't just drag a dead mouse out of the hive. They're not able to lift a box and push it out. And because this is often happens in the winter, beekeepers aren't opening up the hive, so we're not in there clearing out any mice. And so the bees, to protect themselves, they'll completely embalm any intruders with propolis. And so this is something that quite a few beekeepers have experienced. And yeah, poor mouse. So this was one of the talks I did in Lake County Beekeepers, just north of Chicago. And it was in 2019. And you may remember there was the awful cold weather where it went to sort of minus 45, you know, absolutely horrifically cold weather. And my husband and I, we went to visit Chicago for his work and my work just after the weather changed. So they had this awful cold weather and we flew out the Friday, and I think the weather changed like the Thursday night. So we had a week where it was still cold. It was bitterly cold, colder than I've ever experienced in England. But it wasn't too bad. And then on the Wednesday night, Frank had arranged for me to go and speak, and he'd arranged for Marcin, who's on the right there with the red hat on, to pick me up and take me to this group of beekeepers. And I was expecting, like some of the British beekeeping meetings, particularly in January or February, there might be sort of 10, 20, maybe even 30 people. There was over 100 people who'd come out in the most horrendous heavy snow and strong winds. And what was great was they'd come out to hear me speak and to hear Marcin chat as well, and to do his presentation about bee health. And obviously the drive there and the drive back, we had lots to talk about with bees. And he told me more about Marla Spivak and her work, because Minnesota is not too far away from Chicago. And so he was more aware of her work. And so she's been working with an aim to reduce the reliance on antibiotics inside beehives and to get bees back on their own 6 feet. So not everyone realizes how many chemicals are used inside a hive. And very much like humans, they have become used to being farmed, to being managed, using a lot of chemicals to try and maintain health. Now, with naturopathic beekeeping, we try not to use, well, we don't use any chemicals. We try and follow the natural way of taking care of things. And so it's really exciting to have a scientific research team who are actually doing this kind of work. So Marla has been working on having an envelope of propolis inside the hive. And Professor Tom Seeley, who's done a lot of research as well on natural beekeeping and wild bees, he's found that bees that live in the wild, they will completely coat the inside of their tree trunk with propolis. And because it's this waxy resin and creates an envelope, protective skin for the colony of bees, it also helps for moisture, because water can actually trickle down the inside of this propolis and the bees are able to drink during the winter months. So they have water. So it's an amazing stabilizer of the environment inside the hive. And what was really stunning and really amazing research that Marcin was able to share with me was that her team had been experimenting with bees and trying to develop a strain of bees that are more resistant to diseases. And they found that the bees that can produce more propolis and create an envelope were then resistant, and they had protection against American foulbrood and chalkbrood diseases. And these are really serious diseases that will kill a colony. And American foulbrood is a notifiable disease. So to find that you've got bees who are naturally resistant to these kind of infections as long as they've got propolis. So what can we learn from that? I mean, just brilliant. So last year, I also went to Appomondia in Canada, and as well as all the talks and all the presentations, there was also an amazing exhibition hall with people from all around the world showing their honey, beekeeping equipment and propolis. And this was an amazing lump of propolis from Argentina. And to give you an idea of the size of it, here's the lady who was displaying it. So this amazing great chunk of propolis. And it's a really dark colour. And this is what's amazing about propolis, is because it's so dependent on the environment. So where the bees have access to different types of pollen and different types of resin from different species of trees, propolis has different properties from all around the world. So it's not something that you can say all propolis is the same. Propolis is different depending where you get it from. And there she has flasks where they've done extractions of different types of propolis, and you can see the different colors and how the propolis changes when it's been dissolved in alcohol or with oil or water, or it's come from different regions. And then the Brazilian propolis is famed for its medicinal properties. And this is a sort of a green color. It doesn't really come out in the photograph, but it is an incredible shade of green. So coming from the Amazonian rainforests and from where the bees have access to completely different trees, they create different types of propolis. And then those of you who followed some of my other webinars, you'll know that I went to Cocos Keeling Island in January, and seeing the bees there, I actually was able to extract this much propolis from one inspection from some bees that were actually in a wooden hive. And that's an amazing propolis. And I have actually brought that home, and I'm making a tincture. So I'll show you the color of that in the flesh in the jar a bit later on. So you can see there's different colors of propolis. And here the propolis we have is a very golden, orangey red color. So you can see the Hessian cloth there, where you've got stripes of pollen of the propolis that's going across in between. You can just see the pattern of the frames and how the propolis fills up the gaps. And then on the right, opening up the hive, you can just see it glistening, this amazing honey red colored propolis. What's also interesting is people wonder why wax is often different colors, and a fresh wax is white. But as the bees are moving around it, and as it has more pollen stored in it, honey stored in it, eggs, larvae, and as the bees are walking around an area, it becomes older wax. And so it gets the footprints, and it also gets coated with propolis. The bees will actually put propolis around the cells to protect the larvae that's growing in there. So they'll do a thin coat of propolis inside a cell before the egg is laid. So it's really, the bees know how important it is, but it's lovely to see the fresh white wax. But at the same time, it's great to see the ancient wax that's held together with this amazing substance. So this is some of my propolis from my colonies in my garden. So you can see the color, it's more of a ruby red, so completely different from the green that you get in Brazil, or some of the even dark black propolises from around the world. So who here is a beekeeper and has been collecting propolis? So do put a comment here if you've got any kind of experiences with propolis. Do you love it? Do you hate it? You know, put your comments in here. I'd be interested to know what you think. So here we go, is a bit more. So this is older propolis. So as it's on the hive and on the frames, and again, as it gets more bees coming and going over it, it will get grubby. So that's a bit of darker propolis there. So as a beekeeper, and if you're going to want the propolis, how do you extract it from the hive? Well, here there's a hive in a skep. Well, that would be very difficult to take propolis from. Skeps are brilliant for the actual bees to line because it's got this uneven surface. It's something for the propolis to stick to. So it makes it easier for bees to produce their skin, their protective skin. Whereas in a smooth box hive with planed walls on the inside, it's very difficult for the bees to get the propolis to actually hang on to those sides. So it's quite good to rough up the insides of your hives, and that makes it easier for the bees. What Tom Seeley does is he puts plastic sheets or some of the propolis mesh, he'll put that on the inside of the hives to encourage the bees to fill up the little gaps with propolis, and then he moves them away. So we're just finding that as the hives get older, they become more and more coated with propolis. So again, here's, you can see a bit of propolis that's blocking in the gaps. So you could just pick that out, but it's going to make a breeze. It's going to make a hole for the bees. So the best time to do it is when you're either inspecting a hive, or if you've had a hive die out, or if you're taking honey and you'll find that you've got propolis on some of the frames. And that's something to do to actually pick off the propolis then. So when it's in the hive, when the bees are alive, the propolis is very warm and sticky, and it's very difficult. It sticks to everything, and it's quite difficult to harvest. So what you can do is you can scrape off what you can, put it in a jar, and then put it in the freezer, which makes it a lot easier to manage later on. Or you can do put screens. You can get a mesh, a fine mesh that you can put. It's specifically for propolis collection, and you can put it over the top of the frames or even down the sides, and the bees will fill it in with lots of propolis. And you can take that out the hive, put it in your freezer, and then when it's frozen, you can just crackle it off and you'll get these little pieces of propolis that you can put in a jar ready to do something with. So here we go. There's some of my propolis in a jar ready to extract. And you can see just by the warmth of the propolis, it will stick to the inside of the jar. So there's no way that jar is going to be able to be used for anything other than propolis ever again. And here you can see there's a bee just drinking honey, which I just love. It's always nice to have a picture of a bee. But on the right, we've got one of the freedom hives. So where you saw me up a ladder with the tall or the long log hive, this is looking inside. And if you look at where the wax is, around the outside of that, it's darker on the wood. And this is where the bees have started to put together their propolis envelope. And as the wax comb comes down the hive, the bees then expand their propolis skin, so it will come right the way down to the hive, and they'll also be blocking and opening up the entrances, so they're creating their skin as they grow. So I'm going to be doing a naturopathic beekeeping course, and I'm going to be talking more about our methods and how we actually look after the bees and how you can look after bees if you're going to be trying not to use chemicals so much, but actually using bees' natural immunity. So we've got a banner here. So if you go to this site, which is courses.paulacarnell.com, you can then subscribe, and you can download a free copy of my Principles of Naturopathic Beekeeping. So as soon as you register your interest, you'll get that book, and then you'll get more and more information about the courses. It's going to be a 4-week course through September. Obviously, it's not physical. It'll be done on Zoom, and we'll have a private group, and you'll have worksheets, and we'll have a live session every week where you can ask me questions. But the point is that you're going to be taken on a journey from everything you need to know about beekeeping. So it's really good if you want to have bees, but you just don't know where to start. So I'll help you look through all the different choices of beehives, depending on whether you're interested in conservation or honey. And then we'll talk about where to position them and go right through the whole process, so you'll understand more about bee diseases and the threats to them and what we can do. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to minimize this so that, hang on, I'm going to minimize this so I can show you some pictures that I've got here and some tinctures that I've been making. So I've got here, this is, sorry, mucky jar. This is the Cocos Keeling propolis, which I put in a jar on the 27th of March. And you can see how cloudy it is and the colour. And so this is as it's dissolving into the alcohol. And you need a really strong alcohol to extract this propolis, but it gradually goes softer. And then to show you the difference in colour, this one here is a tincture from my propolis. So it's a very different colour to the Cocos Keeling. So what you do is you have 25% propolis and 75% alcohol, and you just leave it. There have been studies. There's an amazing expert on propolis called James Fernley. I've got his book here, one of his books, and he's been studying propolis for years and years and years. So if you want to know anything, and this book is great because it's got recipes and all the different treatments that people use propolis for. So in there, he talks about how propolis became really popular in about 1994. And there was a journalist who'd been using tinctures and creams with propolis in for all kinds of ailments. So he had asthma, he had eczema, and inflammation, he had arthritis, and he wrote an article in a national paper that had 4 million readers, and he was just proclaiming how great it was, this propolis. And so through 1994, propolis was in every health store. Everybody was interested in propolis. But then there was a bit of a disaster at the end of 1994 where the propolis was examined by environmental health, and they found it had a high level, 1,500 parts per million of lead in it, which obviously was caused an outcry. So although people had been having a lot of benefits from propolis, there was then this concern that propolis was dangerous because of the high quantity of lead. Now, studies since have shown that the trees, particularly in London, and this was in London where they had the high proportion of lead, but trees in London absorb a lot of the lead from the pollution. And so the lead was then secreting from the trees in the resin, and the bees were then taking that. So although there was a high level of lead, there was no evidence to show that that high level of lead was then affecting people who were taking the propolis. However, the rules then changed, and so propolis can only be sold if it's got 1 part per million of lead in it. So you do need to be really careful where you get your propolis from, and that's why it's getting harder to find propolis. But like all great health things, you can find that there's a lot of propolis and it's all different qualities. So if you're going to buy propolis, it's really good to buy it from a trusted source, from a trusted beekeeper, or ideally have your own from your own hive, because you know your environment, you know what your bees have access to. So if you have your propolis, so when I've extracted it, you get a bit of gunk after the oil, after the alcohol has dissolved it, and then you get this gunk. So what I do then is I put oil in so I can extract, and this takes a long time, this takes about a year. I can extract any other properties from that, and I can use that as a balm. But what I love for propolis, and I'd got a great little spray when I was in Canada from some beekeepers there, where they mix the propolis tincture with a bit of honey and water it down so you don't have such strong alcohol, and you can have it as a spray. And because it's antiseptic and of all these amazing properties, if ever you get a bit of a sore throat, you just spray this stuff in, and it does work as a bit of a anesthetic because your throat goes numb. So propolis has been used in toothpaste and for dental hygiene and for dental treatments for quite a long time. And if you ever have any kind of abscesses, if you can get a bit of propolis and either rub it into your gum or chew it or find a spray, then it's absolutely amazing. So there's lots of research about that. So inside a hive, the bees will make 10 to 300 grams of propolis per hive. And in the world, there's a market now for 300 to 400 tons of propolis each year. So that means there's about 1.5 million beehives that are harvesting or harvested propolis. So people are using propolis from all these hives. So it's amazing. So the best way that you can use your propolis is have your own hive, take a little blob of it out of the hive when you next inspect them, and just chew on it. And then that's really good. You get releasing all the great benefits of this magical stuff. So it's really, really amazing property. And if you can find propolis, it's great. And what I love is when you have your beehive and you open that hive up and you smell the propolis mixed with the honey, mixed with the wax, but it really is that propolis smell. So the smell of the hive, and then you're inhaling it. And if you just think of all the goodness that is inside these this propolis mixture, and you're actually going to be getting that when you're inhaling. So there we go. So if you want to know more, then you really need to, try and get the book, get your free copy of the book, and join me for the naturopathic beekeeping course. You'll become part of a colony of beekeepers who are really interested in protecting the health of bees. And that's what we need, is healthy bees, because if the bees die, we really are stuck. And whether or not it's due to pollination or because they're an indicator species, we really do need to save the bees. So let's be kind. Let's allow them to make the propolis. Let's keep our trees, because if propolis needs the resins of trees to actually be manufactured by the bees, then it's no good if we fell our trees. So the connectiveness of everything, bees really are that, hopefully not the last piece of the jigsaw puzzle, but they definitely connect plants, trees, humans, and our environment. So we need to keep allowing the bees to make propolis. So don't buy bees that are bred, or import bees that are bred not to produce propolis, and don't cut down your trees because the bees need them. So thank you very much. I hope you've enjoyed this. If you've got any questions, you can always message me and I'll be glad to answer them. So thank you very much. And next week, I'm going to be talking about honey. So everybody's favorite thing about bees is the honey. So I'm going to be sharing how the bees make the honey, why they have honey, the different varieties of honey. I might even do a bit of tasting, but I'm sorry I can't do the tasting and share it all with you. So join me next Friday at 4 o'clock, where I will be talking about honey. Then I'm going to have a break for a week. And then the following week, I'm going to be talking about beekeeping and should we or should we not keep bees. So join me then. If you're interested in learning more or working with me, just go to courses.paulacarnell.com, send me a message, comment on here, and I'll help you however I can. So thank you very much and goodbye.